It's Cheer.
And this is Loathing.
We're here to talk to you about movies.
She loves everything. I hate everything.
This should be fun.
This is a Morbidly Beautiful podcast.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Cheer and Loathing. It's been a hot minute, but I am Loathing, also known as Casey, also known as the person who makes Stephanie cry. And over there is said Stephanie, also known as Cheer, who happens to love every single thing that has ever been produced in the history of cinema.
Wow, we're off to a good start.
We are.
I don't know how cheerful I'm going to be today. I'm a little tired. I would say emotionally tired with some of the discourse that has been happening around the movies that we are going to be talking about today. So I would say my mood is trepidatious.
Oh, that's at least a $3 word, which is far too expensive for this podcast.
Yeah. I'm super nervous. Just given what I know about you and our history and these films that we're talking about and my feelings for these films we're talking about. So why don't we talk about what we're talking about and then rip the Band-Aid off?
All right, I guess since Stephanie's all kind of bummed that her new best movies to ever have been made, mind-blowing experiences, not everybody loves. So we're talking about a couple, I guess rebirths, I think is how you worded it in the ad or the promo for this. Makes sense because we're talking about Hellraiser and the latest Halloween movie. For the first time in a very long time, we are talking about very, very recent movies, as in like released this last week.
Yeah. So for just a little bit of context for our listeners, so we took a little break and a big part of that break is because I was attending a film fest in Austin called Fantastic Fest. And one of the films that I was able to see was the world premiere of the new Hellraiser. And so, I reached out to Casey and I was like, okay, I really want to talk about this movie because it's about to come out. Everybody's going to be able to see it. And I think there's a lot to talk about here. And we've talked about a Hellraiser before, and I know how we both kind of feel about this franchise. So thought that'd be a great choice. And at the time, I said, what I think would be cool is if we did like a David Bruckner double feature, who's the director of the new Hellraiser, and see his movie Night House, which I actually have not seen yet. But I've heard lots of great things about it. And I was like, okay, that'll be a really great double feature. And we were all set. And I think you messaged me a couple of days ago and said, all right, gonna just throw this out there, controversial, but what if instead of Night House, we cover the new Halloween? And I think, like my reaction was like, no, I don't want to do that.
But too bad. You made me watch Nicolas Cage films, so.
Yeah, not because I dislike it, but because, I've spent the better part of the weekend spiraling due to some social media discourse around this film. And I always am prepared to fight with you, Casey. That's kind of our deal. It's kind of a given going in, but I just wasn't sure I was prepared to fight with you this much about something that matters to me this much. So I was very hesitant, but then you talked me into it because you're like, you know what? This is what people want to hear. This is important. It's timely. We should do it. And I caved, but very reluctantly, I would say.
Good. I just want to mention something about your Fantastic Fest coverage, which was wonderful. I'll give you the compliment that your Fantastic Fest coverage was very up to date. It was very timely. It was very lovely.
Okay,
but I screenshotted every single post you made on social media. 22, I believe it is, where you mentioned wonderful, excited, mind-blowing, best film of the year. 22 times you said that throughout the course of your coverage.
I am not going to apologize for that, and I'm going to tell you why. I know how you feel about me and my obsessive love for
Masterpiece,
movies
sorry.
and the
Masterpiece
way
is
that
another one.
what I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Masterpiece was one you said at least a half dozen times, 2 dozen
Of
times.
course.
Yeah.
I know how you feel about my over enthusiasm for movies, and you know what? I will give you. I don't think it's a bad thing. I love movies, and I get very excited. I get very animated, and I get even more excited when I see. We've had this conversation before. I'm a theater girl. I know everybody doesn't feel the same way about that, but for me, watching a movie in a theater is the ultimate experience, and it always enhances my enjoyment of a film. If you take that love that I have for the theater and then you add a film fest where I'm surrounded by this like massive amounts of like energy and excitement, enthusiasm, and I'm surrounded by other people who feel the way I feel about movies, who are a bunch of geeks and cinephiles and just people I love, my people, that amplifies that love I already am inclined to have by, about a million. So, when I'm at these and this is my favorite film fest, like I'm obsessed with this one. When I'm at this film fest, I tend to just be so full of love and life and joy that it does come out in this very exuberant way. That aside, I'm telling you, the films out of Fantastic Fest are objectively mind-blowingly good. Like, the lineup of films they show is just spectacular, and it's films that I might not have otherwise seen. It's a lot of stuff that is, there's mainstream stuff, but there's a lot of under the radar stuff, and you just get to discover all this like amazing stuff that I might have otherwise not been privy to, and it's just a really exciting experience. So yes, I did probably heap a ton of praise on these films, but I think rightfully so. I think there's a lot of merit to that enthusiasm. So yes, you're correct, but I'm not apologetic about it. I think it was warranted.
Okay, then.
There were a lot of masterpieces.
Okay.
And you haven't seen.
You're right. I haven't seen these
99% of them. So
you're very right. I haven't, but I think the term masterpiece should be withheld for something truly extraordinary, not every film you've ever seen.
But these films were extraordinary.
Okay. You mentioned
you would know if you saw them. You would. I don't know. You probably wouldn't call them a masterpiece because you just don't use that kind of nomenclature. But
there's one masterpiece out there,
impressed.
and that is called Avengers Endgame. Okay.
Yeah. No, of course.
Anyway.
Well, if that's the bar, I don't know how you're ever going to rise above it.
You can't. It's impossible. You mentioned theaters, and we will get to theater experiences when we talk about Halloween.
Okay.
We won't go into too detail, but I did see it in theaters, which is the first.
Shut your face.
I know. I saw it on.
Okay.
It's actually funny because, I don't know if it's funny, but when you get to the movies and you're there 10 minutes early or whatever, and the trailers haven't started, but it just kind of like shows a reel of whatever on the screen before shit starts, like little advertisements. Yeah. It was like, I'm sitting there on October 13th. It's like, Halloween ends October 14th. I'm like, I'm a day early.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Honestly, now that you say that, I was pretty taken aback that when you said we should talk about Halloween, because I was like, he's fucking seen it already? Like, you don't,
yeah,
you're not
it hadn't
an
even
early
come out
adopter
yet.
usually.
Yeah.
So that was impressive. I am impressed by that.
Yeah. To be fair though, I did not know it was coming out on streaming the same day of theater release, or I probably would have not gone to theater, but it's okay.
Well,
it's okay.
If I was a betting girl, I would say that you didn't love Halloween Ends. We'll get to it.
We're going to talk about Hellraiser first.
I was going to say, and still will, that I do think it's a very different experience watching a film like that in the theater than watching it on streaming. And I know a lot of people are watching it on streaming, and I don't know how much it's changing their perception, but I just feel like it's a movie that is made for the theater.
Okay. Well, again, we'll get to that. Just put a pin in that. Remember those words, that phrasing, because I think that's something I can touch on, because as we've said, I'm more of a stay at home and fuck the theater kind of thing. So maybe, like you said, maybe that'll skew my opinion on whether I liked it or didn't like it. It's still up in the air. Just because I wanted to talk about it, I want to make this clear. It doesn't mean that I absolutely hated it or automatically hated it. Okay? Okay, we'll get to that. But Hellraiser.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, that's true. Anything's possible.
Anything's possible. Hellraiser, did that? I don't know if that got a theater release.
No, it did
or
not.
a widespread
it went
theater
straight
release
to Hulu.
anyway. Yeah.
I was lucky enough to see it in the theater, which was very cool, and I am sad that it didn't get a theatrical release. But yeah, it didn't get one for the masses.
Fair. Right. So Hellraiser was released earlier this week or late last week. I can't remember exactly when, but it doesn't really matter. It was fairly recent. Rotten Tomatoes, usually there's a big split. This is fairly even. We got 68% and 61% respectively. And the critical consensus is a gift for long-suffering fans. After numerous subpar sequels, David Bruckner's Hellraiser unlocks the puzzle box for getting this franchise back on the right track. And I assume that's something you agree with.
Yes, I do agree with that.
Okay. Why?
Wow, I mean, that's a big question.
It is. I need to know why.
Okay. Well, before I say all the reasons why, are you going to reveal your perception of it? Like, just overall? Are you positive? Are you negative? Are you neutral, or you're not ready?
My overall feeling for this movie was I did not like it.
What?
And not for the reasons you're thinking.
I'm actually surprised by that because I know you're a fan of this franchise.
I
And
love
we
this franchise.
An arguably
Judgment.
shitty
Judgment?
Hellraiser, and
Was it
we
Judgment?
both kind of dug it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually, I usually expect you to hate everything, but I was like, I think he's probably gonna dig the Hellraiser at least. I mean, he'll hate Halloween, but he'll dig Hellraiser. But no Hellraiser love for you. Interesting. All right. God, I want to hear why you don't like it before I tell you why I do like it.
I mean, I can get right into it if you want. I saw this earlier, like the day it came out, maybe the day after it came out on streaming. So it's not super fresh. So I kept my job is very, how do I put it? Mundane. I have a lot of time to think and talk to myself in my own head.
Oh boy. And
I went over this movie about 3 hours a day for the past 4 or 5 days, just reciting these are the reasons. And I want to preface by saying I didn't hate it. It didn't fuel me with a rage that some movies, Repo, did. But I had trouble kind of articulating why I didn't like this movie. And then I read a review on it. And this guy is kind of nailing my thoughts on this movie. First off, I feel like it lacked a whole lot of substance. Usually with a remake, that kind of happens, or a reboot, like the Friday the 13th reboot. Entertaining, sure. Like, it was a fine slasher movie, but it lacked heart. It lacked substance. And that's weird to say for a slasher, but you know what I mean? Like, it felt like there was no soul to it. And I got that feeling with this as well. The characters were very, very unlikable. Didn't give a shit if any of them died. Didn't care. They were all terrible. And a lot of it felt forced. So I think we could have done without a few of the cast members, for example. They played no real part in the story. Like the girl's brother and his boyfriend. So that felt very forced, especially like the homosexuality angle of it felt very, very like, we need to put this in here because it's 2022.
The homosexuality felt forced.
It did. And I only say that because did his sexuality play a role in the movie at all?
Did her heterosexuality? I mean, does it have
No,
to?
but that's what I mean. like, so why did this guy
why can't somebody be gay? Like,
no, I'm not saying
cares?
he can't be. And I don't care. It just felt like he was only there for that reason because we never explored the roommate sexuality, like, and it doesn't matter. So why did we have him in there only just
Because
to be like a gay character? That's what it
no,
felt like to me. It felt like
that's ridiculous. His
no.
boyfriend did play an instrumental role in the story, and it wouldn't have mattered if he was a man or a woman. It's just his partner who's
Right.
invested in.
But I
Like,
mean, that's what I mean. Like, it just felt like one of those things where, what was that movie we watched? Where the two girls go to the cabin, and like the ones there to like kill her, and they're like just married or whatever.
oh, what?
The fuck was
What
that
keeps
called?
you alive?
Was that what it was
What
called?
keeps you alive? I think so.
Something like
That's
that.
correct.
Yeah. That was meaningful. It had purpose. When they throw in these side characters who are like, yeah, he's gay, and then like he dies, and then it's barely never mentioned ever again. It's just like, I feel like, come on. Was it necessary? Like,
I
we
don't
could have done
think-
without any three of those characters, really.
I actually think that's better than having it be like, oh, we're gonna comment on the fact that you're gay, and we're gonna we have to create a storyline around the fact that you're gay. Like, people are gay and
No,
people
I
are
know,
straight, and
but it
who
just-
gives a shit?
I like I said, it was one of those things that rubbed me the wrong way, just because I'm like, it didn't matter to the story, it didn't matter to the plot, it didn't matter to the characters. It was like he was there, and I don't know how spoiler heavy we want to get. He was there, introduced, and then basically died.
I feel like that's saying like, okay, there was a black character. You're like, oh, why did this character have to be black? I mean, do they just have to be black? It's like sometimes people are black. Like, who cares?
But the thing is, they
I don't
pointed
think
out
it has to be instrumental into the story. It's just a reflection of the fact that people are diverse.
right. But I mean, it would be the equivalent of like if there's a black character, like, oh, that's Steve, he's black.
I don't think they did.
They did. They
I
go,
don't
oh,
feel
that's
like-
my brother and his boyfriend, and they're like, hey, and I'm like, okay,
doesn't-
let's
That
see
would
where
be
this
the same
goes,
thing
and then
if it
like
was
they never
that's
really.
his brother and
I
his
don't know.
girlfriend. Like,
Well, exactly.
I don't
Like
know.
that's what I mean.
okay,
So they
weird
could have done without the
commentary.
relationship in period. They could have been, that's my brother and that's my roommate.
But you need characters who are invested.
need characters to
in the plight of
die.
the other. Well, sure, it's a horror movie, so yeah, you do need characters to die, but you also need characters who are invested in the plight of the main character.
Yeah, but it
And
seems like they forgot about him.
so. They have to have relationships. They have to be connected in some way. Otherwise, they.
But
aren't gonna
wasn't
give a
like the
shit.
brother-sister relationship close enough to like a caring
Sure, but
relationship?
I mean,
Then why have the roommate? Like, it just a lot of these characters just felt
Because-
forced and unnecessary.
the roommate was a really instrumental part of the film. That's such a
How?
weird thing to say.
How?
What do you mean? How he was like?
No, the roommate was
He
a
was-
girl. Yeah, the one you forgot completely about.
No, I meant. Well, I guess I meant like the boyfriend.
No, the boyfriend, fine, whatever. He plays a small part at the end, I would say. But the roommate, like the girl, she's just like there, and then she tags along, and then like she's very forgettable, and then she dies.
I actually really liked her and was kind of upset when she died. To be honest with you, I thought she was a good. I mean, she was underutilized, but she was a good character. And I actually, I don't know, I kind of vehemently disagree here because I thought the characters were pretty engaging and interesting. I thought they actually did a really good job with that. I mean, it's pretty hard in a film like this. You don't have the time and to go into massive character development for the side characters. That just doesn't happen. And it's not something we actually, as horror fans, even want because we want to get to the good shit. We want the Cenobites. I mean, let's be honest. That's what we're there for.
That's interesting.
So I think if they had spent a lot of time like fleshing out these side characters, we'd been like, what the fuck? Like, where's Pinhead? So I don't know. I feel like they did a really good job, like making me care enough. But how much time did you really want to spend with the fucking roommate?
Like, okay, that's just like a side thing. Like any of the characters, I felt nothing towards. I didn't think any of them were redeemable or had.
Is that just because you have no feelings, though?
No, because that's
let's
what
be fair.
like that's one of the things that this other review I saw mentioned that like
Oh,
the
good
characters were terrible. I'm like, yeah, that's, you know what, that's fair. But you mentioned Pinhead and you mentioned the Cenobites. They were terrible. The designs on them
out
were
of your mind.
no,
You are
no,
out of
no,
your
no. Okay.
fucking
no,
mind.
no. They were fucking. They looked like they were designed by fucking Gucci. They were too clean. These suits that they were wearing did not look good. They looked like they came out of the fucking washing machine spick and span. They didn't look dirty. They didn't look gross.
The suits were badass.
They were awful.
Did you
They look
get
so
the fact
clean.
they didn't. You're you've literally lost your damn mind. I mean, honestly, this is chaos theory right now.
I watched this with my wife, and she said the exact same thing. She's like, "Why do they look so clean? They look like they're drawings."
My wife is married to you, so I've long suspected she's insane as well. So I no offense to her, but
beside the point.
I guess some offense, but hey, listen. Let me ask you a question before you go down, because I feel like now the show has barely started. It's completely off the rails. I don't even know where to go from here. But let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get that they were wearing leather suits made out of their own skin?
No, because it didn't look like that.
So that was the aesthetic behind the Cenobites, is that was because they were trying to figure out, like, okay, how do we sort of modernize this and, obviously keep it true to the franchise, but do something that's a little bit different. So they came up with the idea of the leather, because, the Cenobites are kind of famous for their, like, BDSM leather and coolness, that instead of, like, putting on artificial leather, what if the leather was made out of their own human skin? And wouldn't that be, like, kind of a little bit more true to the universe and pretty cool? And I don't know, I thought it was fucking badass.
I mean, unless you know that going in, like you did the research or the backstory or like heard an interview or something, you never know that. I had no idea that was the case. And it looks like they're just wearing latex spandex suits. It doesn't look good.
They did show that at the end when they turned the bad dude into a Cenobite at the end.
Yeah,
they
I don't know.
showed the process of him becoming a Cenobite.
Sure, but I mean, they didn't show. Yeah, you see, but I mean, you don't know that's because all Cenobites are supposed to be different.
Film, or did you just read some shitty reviews?
No, I watched the fucking movie, and that brings me to another point that we'll get to in a minute. But I can't get over how bad these. If you put these Cenobites next to the 1980s Cenobites, the 80s ones win every time. And that's fucking like 40 years or 30 years of special effects. Evolution, I guess, technological advancement, and they look worse than they did in the original.
I was fully prepared. Like, you know how you have to, like, athletes and stuff, they have to train before a big event or like before a big like boxing match or something. They do like extensive training.
Yeah.
I feel like I have to do mental training to prepare for this podcast so that I am prepared to have a sparring match with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very prepared that I was going to have to fight about Halloween again, even though I did not want to do that. I was not prepared to have to fight about Hellraiser as well. So now I'm like, God damn it. Like, I should have done even more training. Because this is really, I mean, I know you're a hater, and it's who you are, but this is kind of crazy to me.
I just have standards and expectations.
What else? I mean, it's one way of putting it. What else sucked about Hellraiser?
What did you think of the new Pinhead? And
absolutely.
literally, like, she literally has like pins and not nails. Like the original.
Yeah. I loved her. I thought the casting choice was pretty inspired. I wrote about this. I know you don't read my reviews. You only read
you told me not to read the review.
People who... Did I?
Yeah, you said I just put a review up for Hellraiser. We're going to talk about it, so don't read it.
Anyway, I think one of the things I talked about is I think part of the problem with Hellraiser, and I feel like there's only, a couple of franchises that are like this. Nightmare on Elm Street is another one where the actor who plays the character is so
synonymous with the role.
It's so integrated and so, like, ingrained in our, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Just
like our culture.
Expectations and our understanding of the film, that it's almost impossible to replace the actor and still have fans be on board. And whenever they try to do it, as we've seen a couple times, both with Hellraiser and with like Nightmare on Elm Street, it doesn't matter how good the actor is. It doesn't matter how capable. it's never the person that you want it to be.
Right.
And so if you're not going to have the person that you want it to be, like, the difficulty of trying to replace him is that anybody who, so if you kind of try to channel him and channel his energy, which I think some of the later Hellraisers did, it's an inferior copy. It's not as good.
Right.
And then if you don't give enough of that energy and what we have come to love about Pinhead and expect from Pinhead, then it's like, we're like, fuck this. This isn't Pinhead. This is garbage. And the whole reason I watch this is for Pinhead.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a no-win situation. It's sort of a losing battle. So
Yes.
I think the gender swap was incredibly smart because it allowed an actor to step into that role and still channel the energy of the character that we love, but not be directly compared to him, and bring enough uniqueness and authenticity that it really worked. I think it worked for me, and I think it was great casting. I thought she was amazing. I thought the way that she was so like graceful, and really sensual and sexy, but also like still threatening and menacing and still like, terrifying in the appropriate way. And I think that is really, I think that's kind of really what Hellraiser is all about, is this like, yes, this is horrific, but it's also sort of sexy, and it's sort of like, it is a seduction in a way. And you do sort of want to be a part of this world, even though it's like all about like torture and pain and suffering. And that is part of what makes Hellraiser so fucking cool. And I think that she did like a phenomenal job sort of channeling that energy and conveying that sort of sense of like danger, but also seduction.
I think you're right to an extent with a lot of that stuff.
Mhm.
I think she did go in on a kind of on her heels, on the back leg, whatever you want to call it. And she had a lot of ground to make up. I had no problem with her per se. Maybe the writing and what they did with her voice was grating. I hated what they did with her voice.
Really? I thought she
Um,
sounded great.
I thought it sounded like too much was done to it.
Mm.
I get they're trying to be like demonic and spooky and scary, but they made it too deep to the point where I'm like, if you're gonna recast her and make the character a female and like you said, like a seductress sort of thing, then don't make her voice sound manly.
Well, that character's also sort of, I mean, yes, it's a female actor, but that character is and all of Hellraiser really is about like androgyny and about not having clearly defined like male and female, but just having sort of that union of both. So I felt like that really worked, because she definitely does have a feminine look, but also there is that androgynous aspect as well that I think is really cool. And with all the Cenobites, you can't really, you can sort of be like, that's the female, but they're not overtly feminized. You know what I mean?
Right. And I get that. Like, but in terms of just like straight technical and production, it didn't sound like it was coming from her. It like when you watch an overdub, like a German movie, but the overdub in English, and the voices just don't quite match the actors. That's kind of what it felt like here. I'm like, that's don't care about the gender swap, whatever. Like it's a complete reboot. Doesn't make a difference to me. Like I'm not usually a fan of that, but it kind of worked here. I just when she spoke, I'm like, I just kind of want to laugh more than be any sort of scared. Like it sounded wrong, but not like a good kind of wrong, like a horror wrong. It just sounded like a mistake.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't. I thought it sounded great. I thought she sounded great. I thought she, similar to with Doug, it's like every time. I mean, here's the thing: that the writers specifically write Pinhead with all the best lines and all the best, like the most gravitas.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw this at Fantastic Fest, the writers were there and they were talking about, how they wrote this character and how they wrote this film. And they said, like, every time Pinhead was going to speak, and they had, she had lines in the script, they would highlight it, in yellow. And basically it was just to tell kind of everyone, all right, this is the most important thing that anybody is going to say in this film. Like, these are the lines that have to land. We have to, like, nail it, because everything that she says, like, she doesn't say a whole lot, but everything she does say, she says matters. And that's what I always loved with the original Hellraiser. It's just like, every time Pinhead opens his mouth, it's like poetry. You feel like something special is happening, which is I don't know, it's such a weird thing to say. I don't know how to articulate it any better than that. It's just like there is, like there's a lyricism to it, but also like a gravitas and an importance and a weight. And I mean, they were very well aware of that when they're writing for her. And I thought that, her delivery of those lines was great. And I think if I had any complaint, it's a complaint that we're always going to have, is that, like, I wanted more, but I also like that it's a measured approach, because I think with characters like that, less is more, because you get too much and then it loses its flair and its
Specialness.
excitement. Yeah.
Be like Christmas
and so
every day.
having it in small doses, I think it's really, I don't know, it worked really well for me. I did think she was really well written, and I thought her delivery was great.
I mean, like, you're not wrong. I can't fault you or argue with a lot of the Pinhead stuff. She was okay. In terms, I guess, like, I could say the bright spot of the movie. Again, and it's not fair to compare her to Doug Bradley, but Doug Bradley did have such a presence, and his voice had such, like, that tone where it's like he speaks, you listen. And I feel like that's what they're trying to replicate. It just didn't hit. And it maybe if you're a first time watcher to the franchise, you've never seen a previous Hellraiser or Doug Bradley Hellraiser, then maybe it has that. But I mean, it's hard to differentiate, or it's hard to separate those feelings or that comparison, because it's always going to be made. It's impossible to not, as much as you may not want to compare it, it's always going to be like, well, that didn't hit the same way as it did before. And
no,
I'm
sorry to interrupt.
No, go on.
Well, I was gonna say we're gonna I think talk about this in Halloween too, but one of the things I struggle with the fandom is that, and this isn't, I'm not saying this to be a hater. I'm just saying I think it's we have to I think we have to take a step back, because every time a movie, a sequel or a reboot or whatever comes out in a franchise that's got a beloved original,
mm-hmm.
there's this instant knee jerk to be like, well, it's not as good as the original. Get this a lot with Halloween. And I'm just like, okay, I think we as fans have to stop saying that, because I feel like, so let me just we'll talk about Hellraiser. Hellraiser, the original, is an immortal classic. It's a fucking brilliant film in so many ways. It is like horror royalty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is ever going to be that. Nothing is ever going to supersede that, especially because everything has a historical context as well. So you have to think about, like, the time it was made and how important it was at the time, and how, revolutionary and how exciting it was to see something so different. That's sort of ingrained in our minds. It's not just the film itself, which is brilliant in of itself, but it's also like the context of when you see it and how you fell in love with it and what it meant to you at the time, and all that stuff is kind of wrapped into these original films. And I think we just need to accept, like, nothing, like, the benchmark isn't the original, right? It's like, can you take what was special about the original, and can you continue to keep that magic alive in some form, enough to, I mean, you're going to have to evolve it. You're going to have to change it. You're going to have to, like, modernize it. But can you, you're never going to have, like, lightning in a bottle twice, but can you, get enough of the essence of it to give it continued life. That's really sort of the goal. And whenever a film comes out and people, if it doesn't resonate, they're like, oh, this is basically, they feel like it's an affront to the original. It takes something away from how great the original was. And I just don't think that's true at all. I think that these are separate standalone entities that have like nothing takes away from how great the original is, right? It's just like, what do you feel about this new one on its own? Does that make sense? Like, I don't feel like I think we just have this tendency to be like, well, I mean, compared to, like, you're like, compared to Doug, I'm like, sure, nobody's ever going to be Doug. And that's why his legacy is forever cemented. But Doug can't do this role forever. So if we want to continue to have this franchise have life and to get some of the magic from it, we're going to have to accept some sort of evolution and change. And it's going to take us a little bit to get used to it. And yeah, we're going to have to like let go of a lot of our like affections and feelings and attachments, but that's how we like move forward. And again, I don't think that she was trying to be Doug, and I think that's part of what made it great. I think other actors in the past have tried to be Doug, and you're never going to be. And so it's kind of better to just be you and let the franchise sort of evolve into a different direction. Okay, soapbox speech over. Sorry.
I mean, your points aren't wrong. Again, I can't argue with a lot of them. However, what I can argue with is I think it is completely fair to, if you're going to undertake a beloved franchise and try to reboot it or restart it or whatever the purpose of the movie is, it has to be compared to the original. It has to be. The original exists and it's always going to compare. The only way to stop doing that is to stop rebooting fucking franchises every fucking 6 months. It's
well, that's
the
what I was
only
going to
way.
say. We might as well just stop. We might as well just let these movies die with the original. Like, there should be no sequels, no reboots, no anything, because you aren't going to top an original that is that influential. You're just not going to do it. I don't care how brilliant of a film you make. It's never going to be, I mean, you know, when you're dealing with like Halloween, it's like John Carpenter himself comes and like makes a film, and he could do everything exactly the same way as the original, and it still would not be as good. Because
I don't know, because the whole reason, I think one of the main reasons the original Hellraiser was as good as it was and as beloved as it was and felt as authentic as it did was because Clive Barker did fucking everything on that movie. He directed it, he wrote the original short story. It's his. And you can feel that is his. And I think he only did the first one, maybe the second one too. I'm not 100% sure. But when it's your creation, you built this from scratch from the very beginning and you saw it all the way through, I think that adds, you can feel that in a movie. And what you don't get that with reboots. You don't get that with sequels who are done. Look at the Nightmare on Elm Street. Like the first one was done by Wes Craven, and then he didn't do another one until like the fifth or sixth one or something like that. And then those are the two ones that people regard as probably the best ones.
But I guess my point is that, so you do a thing and it's brilliant and it blows people's minds and they're like, holy shit, I have not seen anything like this. This is amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the same exact person made a direct sequel,
mm-hmm.
that was the same exact film,
mm-hmm.
essentially with all the beats, even if the sequel was good, even if you're like, that's a good sequel, you're not going to be like, wow, that was better than the first one, because the first one's already happened. And the first one was magical because of the fact that it was so different. It was so like inspired, right? Once you've done that, anything after that is a duplication. And even if it's a good duplication, it's still like, okay, yeah, but I've seen this, right? Like, this is good, but I've already seen this. We've been here. We've done this. Now this is starting to feel uninspired. And this is the trap. This is the problem with any of these sort of like reboots, is because if you have two choices, right? And again, we're going to, I think, get into this at Halloween quite a bit. You have two choices. Basically, you try to do the exact same thing In which case, you're going to be lazy and uninspired. And people are going to be pissed off because they'll be like, I fucking saw this and it was better the first time, right?
Like the most
Or
recent
you do
Star
something
Wars
different,
trilogy.
and then people lose their fucking minds because you dared to deviate from the formula they expected. And those are literally the only two choices. And people don't want either one. And yet, even though we don't really want either one of those things, we want more films. And this is why fandom is so toxic, because we're like, give me more. I need more content. And then you give it to them. And it kind of doesn't matter how you give it to them. It's not good enough. And I think that's where, like, we got to be realistic with our expectations, and we got to be like, okay, why do we want these films? Do you really want exactly what you had before? Okay, great. It's gonna, I mean, at best, it's gonna be good, but it's not going to ever be better than that first thing you fell in love with. And you've seen the first thing. Do you really need more of that? Or do you want some of that magic that made you love it, but with some additional kind of creativity and inspiration? Do you want it to evolve and change? If you do, then there's like hope for these franchises. But if you're resistant to that, then it's like, we really should just stop, because what's the point?
Okay, so I have a couple of questions in there.
Okay.
When you say like the next one's never going to have the magic of the first one, are we talking reboots? Are we talking sequels? Or are we talking both? Because there are plenty of sequels out there that are better than the original, like Star Wars Empire's better than New Hope,
I would
for example.
argue that there aren't plenty.
Godfather 2.
There are a handful of sequels that do either rival or supersede the original.
Right.
It's not common though, Casey. I mean,
no, it's not. You're right. It's not.
It
common.
exists, but it's not a typical thing.
Right.
I am in general talking about any subsequent film. I do think it applies even more to reboots, because at that point, a lot of time has passed. And so really, like, the game has changed, right? Like, if you're going to make a film 40 years later from an original, we've seen a lot of horror. Like, speaking of Halloween, we've seen a lot of horror, and horror has evolved since that point. And horror has evolved considerably since the original Halloween. So then it's like, all right, if I just gave you the original Halloween, it's not gonna feel nearly as like fresh and exciting and innovative and special as it did when that was released, right? So I kind of have to give you something a little bit different. But if I give you something that's too different, you're gonna be like, "Fuck this! This isn't Halloween." Same thing with Hellraiser. It's like, when you are trying to resurrect a franchise and give it, because a reboot is like it's not just about remaking, it's about giving it new life, right? It's about like taking the essence of it and reinterpreting it for a modern age and a modern audience, and seeing if you can jumpstart a new franchise from that. And that is it's a really hard thing to do, because like I said, you've got to modernize it. It's got to work within the context of modern horror for modern audiences, but it still has to respect the original. And depending on how long of a time span we've had between the original and this reboot, it's difficult. I mean, let me say this, like, I don't envy anybody who tries to do it, because these fandoms are intense. And it's like, I literally, like, if I sat down and tried to write one of these movies, like, let's say I tried to write like a new Halloween, I don't know how the fuck I would do it. Like, how do you even come close to pleasing the masses? I feel like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
So that brings me to the next thing I was going to say about that. I guess it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Hellraiser franchise in the next few years, because Clive Barker just got it back. So that copyright was sitting in limbo for a little while, and it was basically free game to anybody who wanted it. But he just won a lawsuit to get the rights to the Hellraiser film franchise back in December 2001, I think it was. So now that he has control over the character again in terms of film sense, I wonder, A, if he'll make another movie, B, how he'll do it, C, if it will try to capture, or if it will capture the essence of the original, because it's him at the helm of it again. the difference between a lot of these franchises and, well, the difference between all like rebooted franchises is the original person behind the magic isn't often involved with the reboot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say a lot of times they do try to get buy-in from the original creator and get them to at least come on as a consultant or a producer.
Right, but how
To
much
try to-
sway does it actually hold? You know what I mean?
I
Like,
think
if
I'd say a lot, depending on who you are.
yeah, I don't know. Like, I think a lot of it's just like a ceremonial thing to be like, we did our due diligence, we brought him on. Like, if we'll talk about Halloween in a minute, but I mean, in terms of that rebooted franchise, I know they brought John Carpenter on as some sort of role. But if they were filming and John Carpenter came on and went, yeah, I don't like that, and what's David fucking Green? What's the fuck his first name?
Green.
David Gordon Green, is that what it is?
It's David Gordon Green.
Yeah. If he went, okay, great, John, thanks for the input, turn around and be like, we're not doing what he just fucking said. We're gonna do my idea instead. Like, I'm sure that happens all the fucking time.
I would venture that I would
Okay,
venture
maybe
that
that like that
John
is a bit of an
opinion on
extreme.
Halloween holds a
lot of
fuck
weight,
ton
yes.
of weight,
But
and especially because I think that a lot of these reboots, one of the things I think it is good about it is a lot of them are being made by people who are genuinely passionate about the property. Now, it's like when we argue about, is it a cash grab? Let's be honest. Everything is being made to make money.
Yes.
Nothing is being made for, these films cost too much money to be made for just art's sake alone.
right.
But you can definitely tell when something is made because somebody's trying to cash in on the name and they don't really give a shit versus when they're like, I actually grew up loving this film. I care about this. It matters to me. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing is separating the reboots that are successful or that at least like, get like passion and get discourse and engagement versus ones that are just like seen and immediately forgotten.
Right.
And I do know for a fact that the people involved in both of these films we're talking about are definitely like fanboys, people that are pretty passionate about these properties. Doesn't mean it's going to automatically hit with people, but it does mean that there's like some integrity involved in making them.
Sure. But then we run into the issue of, is it going to be too samey? Whereas it's not going to stand on its own sort of thing, So
let me ask you this. Did you find Hellraiser too samey or did you find it too different? Or just, what was the...
I just found it overall lackluster. I didn't think it was anything original about it. I don't know if you remember, like, I think it's Hellraiser 2. It followed a lot of the same beats as Hellraiser 2, where this mega rich guy wants to open the box because he wants to meet the Hellraiser, so he hires other people to open it for him so he doesn't have the issues, and then in the end, he turns into a Cenobite himself. It follows a lot of the same beats as Hellraiser 2. And
I mean, same source material, so.
Yeah, well, right. But I mean, as you said, like, it's very samey in that sense. It just didn't hit the same way. In Hellraiser 2 obviously isn't Hellraiser 1. It's not as good of a movie, but it still holds its own. It's still a decent sequel. And
it's a pretty good sequel.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, it was before the franchise started falling apart. But it was just like, okay, like you said, I've seen this before. It's not new. It's not... Sure, the characters are different, but the end result is roughly the same.
Yeah, and I guess this is where I struggle because I'm like, well, okay. For me, so I'll just say, like, for me, I think they did bring enough originality to the table to feel like it wasn't completely derivative, but still like honored and respected the franchise. I think with Hellraiser, listen, I when I watch a Hellraiser movie, I have very specific expectations about what I want to see. I think we all do.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I want to have
really
the weirdest boner of all time.
Yeah, well, okay. That's not how I was going to describe it, what I wanted, but sure. But it's like, okay, we want Pinhead. We want that iconic dialogue. That I mean, because honestly, for me, one of the huge things that always separated and elevated Hellraiser above just about anything else was the fucking way it was written and I mean, because it's Clive Barker. I mean, nobody turns a phrase like Clive Barker.
Mm-hmm.
And it is like, I'm an English major. I geek out over like language and stuff. And it's like every fucking word is so purposeful and beautiful and just exquisite. So, I mean, and that's hard to get when Clive Barker's not involved, but that's like, you want that sort of elevated nature of it where it doesn't just feel like a general sort of slasher, hack and slash sort of thing. But more than anything, you want Pinhead and you want those Cenobites and you want it to look fucking cool and you want to see really cool kills and you want to see the torture and shit. And this is a situation where it's like, yeah, okay, you can't serve up exactly the same thing, but you don't want to deviate too much because that's what makes Hellraiser so special is those like kind of key elements. So you sort of have to, again, like it's a tough line to walk because you gotta give people what they want. But once you've seen Cenobites and you've seen like these cool like the torture and the chains and all that shit, it's like you can't just. I mean, do you want to just see the exact same thing over and over again? Probably not. It's not really. You might as well just watch the originals again.
Which is kind of the whole. I
Yeah.
think that's what everything kind of boils down to. Like, I'm
like,
all
you
for
say that, but I do want to see more of it. That's the
Yes,
thing. It's like
I
that's
agree.
the like great dichotomy. It's like I
I
want
know.
fucking more of that on the big screen. I want to see
Hmm.
more Cenobites forever. I don't want it to stop.
I get it. It's like you said. It's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of situations. And I don't envy people who take on reboots or reimaginings or whatever. It's a no-win situation.
Yeah, I will say I do love and appreciate, and I'm reiterating myself, but I do like that some of these reboots that we're getting are being made by people who have a legitimate passion and understanding of the source material. And with source material, like with Hellraiser, it's beyond just like, oh, I like the movies. It's like the actual, written source material, and they have like a reverence. Like the writers talked about like how much research they did and how many books they read and all the comics and all the like studying and stuff, and just really trying to completely absorb themselves into this universe. And I think, even if I know you're like, well, it didn't land for me, I still think that passion comes through in this film. This film doesn't feel like, when you're watching it, to me anyway, it doesn't feel like I'm like, okay, lazy cash grab. Like they're just trying to like cash in on the cachet of this name and how much people want to see another Hellraiser movie done right. I feel like there was real effort that went into this. And I always am somebody who genuinely appreciates effort, even if it misses the mark. If somebody goes for it and they put their all into it and they're like, I'm going to do my very best to make a movie that's respectful of this franchise that I love, I feel like that deserves props and credit.
I mean, we can talk about this forever.
Okay.
It's just
Let's not, though.
No, it's not, because we've been an hour in and we still have to talk about Halloween.
Okay, yeah.
I'm just gonna say that this thing is for all the comics and I don't know what you would call it, the non-Clive Barker lore behind the franchise. I don't know how much of that I would consider valid. Again, like I consider whoever wrote the original, if he didn't have a hand in any subsequent stuff, then it's not canon, in my opinion. Like you mentioned like the source material and stuff, but they changed a lot of the source material. They changed how the lament configuration works. They changed like those fucking steps that weren't in any of the originals, and I don't believe were in the Hellbound Heart short stories either. So I mean, like,
so go ahead. Sorry, so sorry. Keep going.
No, I'm just saying, like, if you want to stay true to the source material, then you have to stay true to the source material. You can't add your own flair to it by changing drastic things like that.
Let me say something and we can end this conversation.
Sure.
You are obsessed with the Marvel Universe? And
I wouldn't say obsessed.
that's
but continue.
I will.
Okay.
I mean, how many writers have touched like these like beloved properties, and how many times has it changed and evolved, and has like timelines shifted and backstories shifted, and character arcs shifted, and you lovingly embrace that. So I don't think, and it doesn't take anything away, like just because you have a character who has had different evolutions and different backstories doesn't make that like character or source material any less valid.
So there's a difference, I think, between comic books and literature, or traditional literature. And that is the company, the publisher, whatever, Marvel, for example, owns those characters. The creator doesn't necessarily own those characters. If you look at something like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they haven't really changed in 40 years because it was an independent comic. And I believe those guys still own a good portion of the rights to that, the two guys who did that. But, like the guy who created Superman is long fucking dead. And DC has since owned or bought the rights to that, so they can kind of do whatever they want with it. And the source material, and to be fair, like the origins of a lot of these superheroes don't change. I mean, Batman's Batman because his parents have always been shot in a fucking alley. Superman's planet always got destroyed. Though, and then the story evolves because it's been around for fucking 100 years at this point. But when you come to something like Hellraiser or Stephen King books or something like that, they're not portrayed in the same way. They're not ongoing stories that need to evolve because it's been going on forever and ever and ever. These were one-off stories that had a beginning, middle, and end, and they concluded, and the source material is there. It's like, you wouldn't take Lord of the Rings and change it from a ring to a fucking necklace that can make people fly into space. Just because that would be the natural evolution or whatever you might want to call it. You stick to the Tolkien lore and you don't deviate, or you will have your fucking nuts chopped off and shoved down your throat. See the difference?
All right.
That's just kind of like my thoughts. Like comics have to evolve because they're ongoing stories. They're serials that go on forever and ever and ever. But a one-off novel doesn't, unless they make sequels to it, which sometimes happens. But again, usually the sequels, you don't usually have Clive Barker's Hellraiser or like Stephen King Cujo and then Cujo 2 written by fucking Stephanie Meyer. So Cujo 2 will be written by Stephen King.
Well, I think we have beat this dead horse
to death
again, and resurrected him and beat him again.
Yeah.
So let's
shift gears to Halloween.
Hellraiser isn't even that controversial. I think most people are pretty like,
yeah, well, it was 68 and 61%. Everybody's kind of like
surprisingly pleased with it.
Yeah,
So
mediocre one
let's
at
move to
worst.
a film that is
a little more polarizing.
Far more polarizing. And talk about Halloween Ends.
Alrighty. So as you can see, that episode ran pretty long. We talked about Hellraiser for a long time. So we decided to split this one up into 2 parts to make it a little bit easier for you to listen to. So that was Hellraiser Part 1. Here comes Part 2 with Halloween Ends.